John McWhorter, do I have a different kind of plea to make if I'm seeking a job in the national sales force of a Fortune 500 company that's never had a black salesman versus seeking a job as a teacher or a place as a student in a publicly financed institution?
I have to give a monotonous answer, Ray. Depends on whether or not there has been discrimination. And what this comes down to is a question that I think we're not asking about affirmative action of any kind. And it's something I've always been quite unclear on. Exactly who decides, who has told us what the proportion of, for example, black people is supposed to be in a given institution and why? Where's the number? And it seems to me that in general, if we don't talk about that, then we're not talking about the students in question. We seem to miss this when we talk about creating diversity and it's holistic and all of these ways of talking around something that's often a little bit more mundane. I want to toss something out. This is the sort of thing that you don't hear about and that is absolutely crucial to evaluating this notion of racial preferences and how long you continue it. UC San Diego, before the ban on racial preferences, there were 1 out of 3,268 black students who were making honors. This is 1 out of 3,268 on the campus. So this was partly because students were being put into the flagship schools. And so this was Berkeley and this was UCLA. That changed. There was a hue and cry. People used certain words. Now, right after the ban, 1 year after the ban, when students who would have been going to Berkeley and UCLA went to UC San Diego, then 20% of the black freshmen were making honors. 22% of the white ones were. 20% of the black freshmen. So that was an experience that they were having. UC San Diego is not too shabby a school. I think that the people who are at UC San Diego would be very unhappy if they were told that black students who went there instead of to Berkeley were being segregated and given substandard education. And I will not, but I could give you several stories like that. And so what about the students, or what about the beneficiaries of affirmative action that we're talking about? What experiences will they have?
Well, let me probe a little further, because you asked who knows what the number is. I think a lot of the litigation, certainly in the private sector, has started from the premise that 0 is not the number, and that when you look at a company based in New York City, which includes the largest black county and 2 of the largest Latino counties in the country, and there have been applicants for jobs, and you've never seen fit to hire any of them over the lifetime of your company, when you take that into court, they fight and say, and I think they, by agreement, 0 is not the number.
Sure, and in a situation like that, I think we can be pretty sure that it could be shown by clear and rather easy argument that there had been some kind of discrimination, because it does happen. There are such cases. But the fact is that that sort of thing nowadays is no longer the norm. And if it's a matter of there were 8% of brown-skinned people in the sales force, and it's decided that somehow it needs to be 13 or 14, that it's just not quite enough, who decides? Where does it stop? And so obviously, if discrimination is demonstrable, go get them. We have to, persecute racism, that's fine. But what about when it barely is? And then it seems to me that we're doing a kind of social engineering, which actually does harm to students in cases such as the one I mentioned.
Those cases usually don't get the kind of heated and emotional attention as a set of suits over a fire department does. And there have been many of those, because in many cities in the country, cities with sizable black populations, where men could see a job in the fire department as a ladder into the middle class for their families, there was historic discrimination. And I'll ask you again, whether privately financed goods, social goods, are different from publicly financed ones.
Well, if you're going to put it in those terms, then, for example, in terms of the fire department cases where it seems that the tests do not work out well for the black applicants, and so the solution is to get rid of the tests, my personal feeling would be an effort to help the black applicants be better at the test, because those things can be done, and I'm not sure what our complete lack of faith is in the possibility of that being done. But getting rid of the test and doing the sorts of things that we've seen, and then calling the white applicants who don't get the jobs racist for not understanding, I think we could advance beyond that in our society.
Julian Bond?
I was going to say Dr. McWhorter is wrong to think that people don't talk about the number. Sandra Day OConnor famously said in her decision in these most recent cases that affirmative action ought to have a 25-year life. But in her autobiography, she asked the rhetorical question, how will we know when women have reached equality in America? And she said, we'll know when women have reached a percentage in the professions equal to their percentage in the population. So let's say women are 50% of the country, when women are 50% of the lawyers, then we'll know that's okay. Let's say that firemen are 2% of the public employees in the country. When women are 2% or 1% of the public employees, or their equal percent of the employees, then we'll know. So people do talk about that. And I just found it interesting that Justice O'Connor set a time standard for race-based affirmative action, but a numerical standard and a quota for women.
I disagree, Professor Bond. I actually think that we also have to take cultural factors in mind, even when they're due to racism in the past. And so, for example, the reason that you might not have 13% of black students at an elite school might not be that the people in the admissions department are racists, which I think is vanishingly rare in modern society. It might be that because of the legacy of slavery in the past, the legacy of various things that happened in the 60s, as has been documented exhaustively even by social scientists who don't want to find it, there is a problem with disidentification with school as a white thing among black students, and in a sharper and more decisive sense than just the ordinary proportion of white nerds. That's there. It's unfortunate. It's changing. It's being worked on by black communities across the country. But that could be the reason. And the way that you address that disidentification, for example, is not to have lowered standards of admission, because it would seem that that would only encourage the cultural legacy that we're talking about.